talk show tonight is on ibogaine, and we should have a lively discussion. My name is Alan P. I run the Harm Reduction Commission in the United States, and I know from experience of when we put on ibogaine sessions at our conference, they've always been very packed, and we have a good crowd. And from experience also, there's a lot of interest from drug users as to the effect and the impact of ibogaine once they use it. Let's get on with this. We're going to start off with Howard Lotsof.
Is microphone working? I guess it is. My presentation is on the history of the science and politics and advocacy of ibogaine. And science, like every other avenue of human endeavor, is certainly has a political nature. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what ibogaine is. And sorry for the poor photo. Ibogaine is found in the West African plant Tabernacula boba. The alkaloids are principally found in the bark of the root, and the usable forms include scraped or ground root bark, as is used in Bwiti religious ceremonies in West Africa. There are also table alkaloid extracts that are used, and purified chemical grades of ibogaine, and hopefully one day an improved and regulated form of the drug. There's a considerable amount of data available on ibogaine, from the most simple chemical information, such as this found in the Merck Index, and this gives you a sort of a background where the botanical source used for hundreds of years in African medicine and religion. In 1901, ibogaine was isolated by Dybowski and Landrin. In 1958, its molecular structure was determined by Bartlett. In 1962, I discovered its anti-addictive effects. In 1991, the National Institute on Drug Abuse in the United States initiated the evaluation of ibogaine. In 1993, the Food and Drug Administration approved a clinical study of ibogaine. And in 1995, NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, held an important ibogaine clinical review. Ibogaine has been driven by the patents because they've allowed us to raise funds for development. And there were 5 patents in the area beginning in 1985 and proceeding through 1992. And these patents were for the treatment of narcotic dependence, cocaine and amphetamine dependence, alcohol dependence, nicotine and tobacco dependence, and polydrug dependence. This is a brief overview of important points in the regulatory and scientific development of ibogaine. In 1986, the first attempt at drug development of ibogaine was by the Dora Wiener Foundation in 1983. The foundation was not able to raise any significant funding. In 1986, a for-profit corporation, NDA International, was established and subsequently raised $4 million towards the approval of ibogaine, initiating research and patent development. In 1991, the National Institute on Drug Abuse approved their ibogaine research project, and in 1993, we saw FDA approval for University of Miami clinical studies under a contract to NDA International. This briefly, and I'll go through this very briefly, covers my period of involvement, of commercial involvement with ibogaine. The discovery in 62 and 63, in 81 through 96, there was patent development. In 1987, we had the first extractions performed at the Center for National Research in France. The first publication was by Jolin at Erasmus University, showing that ibogaine diminished opioid withdrawal, and then Stanley Glick between 1986 and, in fact, right through the present time, has published possibly 3 dozen papers on ibogaine and an ibogaine congener called 18-methoxycoronarine. Between 1988 and 1990, the International Coalition for Addict Self-Help and the Dutch Addict Self-Help focus groups, known as DASH, involved themselves in providing ibogaine to Dutch and American and European heroin users. Patricia Broderick at the City University of New York between 1990 and 1996 involved herself with the study of ibogaine's effects on cocaine, and between 1990 and 1993, NDA International, with the cooperation of Professor Dr. Jan Bastians, conducted clinical studies in the Netherlands. Dr. Sanchez Ramos and Dr. Mash at the University of Miami between 1991 and 1996 were involved in the FDA study. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse ibogaine study period was between 1991 and 1996. Between 1994 and 1996, clinical studies moved into hospitals in the Republic of Panama and Panama City. Between 1993 and 96, Dr. Rizvani evaluated ibogaine's effects on alcohol dependence. And between 1993 and 1996, Dr. Popek at the National Institute of Health and at the Polish Ministry of Science provided a review of ibogaine and sub-studies concerned with its stimulant nature. In 1996 and 1997, an Israeli company, Umatech, planned for clinical studies in Israel. NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, initially rejected ibogaine research. NIDA was petitioned to perform ibogaine research between 84 and 90, first by the Dora Wiener Foundation and later by NDA International, a company established to make ibogaine available as an approved medication. In 91, NIDA formed its Medications Development Division and accepted a product profile review from NDA International that resulted in NIDA starting their ibogaine research program. The first scientific publication of ibogaine's anti-addictive effects was by Jolik, who published in 88 on the effects of ibogaine diminishing withdrawal in naloxone-precipitated morphine-dependent rats. National Institute on Drug Abuse, which funds 85% of drug addiction research worldwide, responded with a paper from their intramural researchers entitled "Ibogaine Fails to Reduce Naloxone-Precipitated Withdrawal in Morphine-Dependent Rats." That was answered, and this is where we begin to see the politics of science as they relate to ibogaine, but politics are evident in science as they are in any other human endeavor. Additional research was that supported Jolik's findings were published by Stanley Glick from Albany Medical College, who evaluated Jolik's work, who evaluated Sharp and Jaffe's work, and provided his own work, and determined that ibogaine did in fact diminish morphine withdrawal in morphine-dependent rats. Jolik then went and demonstrated ibogaine's effects on cocaine, and as you can see, there is a dose dependence decline in cocaine self-administration based on single and multiple administrations of ibogaine. Rizvani evaluated ibogaine's effect in the rat on alcohol intake, and there again you can see a dose-dependent response of the diminishment of alcohol intake caused by ibogaine. Alper and myself and Frank and Luciano Bastians did a review article evaluating the outcome in patients who were principally treated in the Netherlands and Panama for opiate withdrawal. And MASH in 2001 published a heroin study, and you can clearly see that there's diminishment of opiate withdrawal signs in her patients. Now, many of the subjects who take ibogaine describe the effects. One of the effects is returning them to a pre-addictive state. And in terms of the science, what we have to look at is that ibogaine served to decrease induced levels of dopamine activity in drug-experienced animals or humans from elevated sensitized levels back to baseline levels. And that's the way scientists describe it in a rat. Human subjects describe it as being returned to a pre-addictive state. Tissue distribution, this is a paper by Howe and Glick, and it was very important because there was a question as to what was the nature of ibogaine's long-lasting effects, with MASH proposing that ibogaine's metabolite, noribogaine, was a long-acting drug. But Glick's theory, which I believe holds more relevancy, is that ibogaine is sequestered in the fat, released over time, and the reason that we were seeing noribogaine levels, ibogaine's metabolite, longer out is that when noribogaine is metabolized, it throws a higher plasma levels than ibogaine and is therefore observable for a greater time out than ibogaine. NIDA, at this point, contracted with neurotoxicologist Mark Molliver to investigate the neurotoxicity of ibogaine. And Molliver, in this paper, indicated markers which demonstrated at approximately 4 times the therapeutic dose that there appeared to be markers for neurotoxicity. Now, that was responded to by Molinari out of Glick's group and showed that at 40 milligrams a kilogram, which is a higher dose than would be used in humans, but a good dose in a rat, that there was no neurotoxicity. Molliver then published again, and Molliver, by the way, is a brilliant researcher, published again showing that the exact area of neurotoxicity were in Purkinje cells, but I think this matter gets resolved when in 2000, Zhu et al. Published on a dose-response study of ibogaine. And what makes this a very interesting study is that it was accomplished in part out of the National Toxicological Research Laboratory, which is an FDA laboratory. And it showed no neurotoxicity whatsoever in rats at 25 milligrams a kilogram. Other researchers indicated no evidence of neurotoxicity in a primate and a mouse, and a post-mortem neuropathological study of a woman who was treated with 30 milligrams of ibogaine showed no neuropathology. There were a number of review papers, all very excellent. This one by Glick, Mechanisms of Action of Anti-Addictive Effects of Ibogaine. Alper and Kaplan and I recently published on a review of the use of ibogaine outside of the African Bwiti religious context. And if you look at PubMed, which is a public access to the National Medical Database, you can see there are over 280 papers now published on ibogaine, the majority on ibogaine's effect on narcotic dependence. Ibogaine has multiple mechanisms of action and receptor system effects where drugs of abuse all show activity. These include dopamine, opiates, serotonin, NMDA, nicotinic, GNDF, and signal transduction independent of receptor binding. The objective of the pharmaceutical industry is to return a profit to corporate shareholders. And this greatly affects the selection of compounds and indications for drug development and tends to discourage the development of innovative drugs to treat addiction. NIDA has focused on already existing drugs which are then developed for addiction as a new indication, and not the development of fundamentally new pharmacological studies such as ibogaine. And this was the first page of an agreement between NIDA and Rickett Benckiser to develop buprenorphine, and signed in 1994. In 1995, at the ibogaine review meeting, based principally on the statements of industry representatives, NIDA decided not to fund clinical studies of ibogaine. However, in 2004, based on the possibility of foreign clinical studies, NIDA made available under the Freedom of Information Act a drug master file that had been provided to the FDA, consisting of 16 volumes of data of approximately 400,000 pages. And this gives you an idea of some of the studies. There were acute oral toxicity studies, 32 day dose ranging studies, dose-response neurotoxicity studies, dose-response effects of ibogaine on analgesia and mortality in morphine-dependent rats, pharmacokinetic studies, dose-ranging toxicity studies in the dog, acute neurotoxicity studies in the dog. There were what they called an Ames test, which is a mutagenicity test, and a lymphoma mutagenesis assay, which indicated that ibogaine was not mutagenic. Now, among these 16 volumes of data, mutagenicity studies showing ibogaine not to be a thalidomide drug, and this is the final report from the Ames test indicating that the results of the study indicated that it did not cause positive response with any of the tester strains in the presence or absence of Aurocalera-induced rat liver enzyme. And this is, okay, thank you. So I'm going to, what we have here is a comparative safety study of ibogaine indicating that between 1989 and 2006, there were 11 drug-related fatalities with ibogaine. In 2004, there were 3,965 drug-related fatalities with methadone. And in 1999, there were 112,000 drug-related fatalities from FDA-approved drugs in U.S. hospitals. Ibogaine activist advocacy organizations have played an important role in ibogaine development. The International Coalition for Addict Self-Help in 1989 initiated studies in addicts. Dutch Addict Self-Help picked that work up in 1990. Cures Not Wars supported that work beginning in 1994. And in 2004, an underground movement began in the United States called Freedom Route, which has probably treated approximately 300 heroin and methadone-dependent patients. This was a logo used by iCash to attract attention. It was very effective. Nico Adrians was one of the founders of both the Rotterdam Junkies Union, Dutch Addict Self-Help, DASH, and established the first needle exchange in 1981. DASH was an ibogaine self-help organization that petitioned the Dutch government and organized drug users to demand ibogaine availability. DASH provided ibogaine at no cost to heroin users. This was a photograph taken during a parade on Fifth Avenue of ibogaine organizing in the United States by ibogaine advocates. And Cures Not Wars petitioned was very important in petitioning the National Institute on Drug Abuse to initially evaluate ibogaine in their studies between 1991 and 1995. Thousands of these leaflets of Storm NIDA were given out in Washington and Bethesda, Maryland. There's a Mindbox internet list, which consists of thousands of users who can discuss their experience with ibogaine, and there are also providers and medical doctors on the list. This is one of the statements of one of the users. We feel that the continuing to focus offshore outside the U.S. has not served the majority of people inside the U.S. Like many other grassroots movements, so, we want to see this in all major U.S. cities. And ibogaine represents both harm reduction and demand reduction. And I'll go into that at a later point. I'm just running out of time. What is important is ibogaine's effect on stigma. Stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. For instance, the stigma of chemical dependence. Ibogaine's effect on stigma. Ibogaine has the ability to remove the stigmatized condition, transforming the patient to a state often described as pre-addictive. The transformation of a stigmatized person into one who is not stigmatized will affect the individual, allowing a greater contribution to self and society, improving the quality of life issues. Why ibogaine is not available, less important than paths to ibogaine availability. Pharmaceutical companies or government agencies are needed to finance regulatory development. Supplies of pharmaceutical-grade ibogaine, this is now being facilitated. A grassroots constituency demanding availability, now being facilitated. Political advocacy, slowly coming online. The scientific community supporting ibogaine, has been there. We hope that we will see further and significant research in the future. Okay. Why Ibogaine should be available? It should be available because it significantly reduces withdrawal, it interrupts drug craving, it returns patients to a pre-addictive state, it eliminates stigma, returns free choice, and it's in your hands. Thank you.